you could do that for us as we start, that would be great. You can, other than we won't hear you on the Zoom or the Skype. Okay. Sorry.
Hello. I just wanted to start by just acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri and Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I also wanted to acknowledge the role of First Nations communities in terms of their invaluable contributions to our understanding of climate change and the environment. I was actually in an event last week called Deep Listening in Glenfern Valley Bushland, and I wanted to share it with you because it reminded me of the power of being present in the moment, being connected to this place, to being connected to country, and that ability to be present enables you to listen and listen more deeply. So I hope for the next 2 hours you can put aside your worries, your stresses of your normal day-to-day life and be here for the next 2 hours to listen to this important conversation. So thank you.
Well said. So I'd like to again extend that invitation, particularly to Aaron Violi, a current sitting federal member here in the seat of Casey. So welcome, great to have you here. A couple of apologies from some other councillors. Jo Skelton offers her apologies. Councillor Andrew Fulliger offers his, and Daniela Demartino, who is the sitting member for Monbulk, also offers her apologies. So for you who have come, both in this physical arena and those who've joined us through Zoom, you are welcome to these parts. A bit of a quick little logistical spray at you, couple of hours. So that might be a bit intimidating for you. The way we're going to do that is hear from a very good friend of ours, Glenn, who's a lovely dude, interactive, asks a few questions, gets us to scratch your head, so you won't have any troubles listening to this guy for a couple of hours. But having said that, it will be interactive. We're going to welcome questions, we're going to welcome some discussion, a brief kind of sense of format. We're going to hear a bit from Glenn. He's going to give us some info, try and answer some preliminary questions. We've got a PowerPoint for you to aid those visual learners. But then we're just going to briefly turn to one another and explore some of the questions that are emerging for us. To just really hone, to really maximise the question time we'll then have into the floor, to maximise those questions, if we've just chatted about it in pairs and twos and threes, that'll just make it, to really crystallise those questions, we can then throw those at Glenn and he will categorically answer them perfectly, which is fantastic. That's right, he's starting to panic already, so apologies. So that's how the format of our time will gather, and it may well be we wrap up early, so there's no need to land it exactly in 4, but there's a rough sense of territory for our type A's amongst us. Some logistics. Bathrooms are out through that door and through the little corridor to your right. Please hang around at the end for coffee. It's free, but also a welcome donation to cover those costs. But if you didn't come prepared with any dosh, that's fine. But otherwise, the one thing we just need to say from a practical point of view is for those Zooming at home and for those who are recording this, we do need you to speak into a mic. So when a mic is passed around, you may feel you have a very loud voice, which is wonderful, but whatever's not set into a microphone will not be picked up by those listening at home. So even if you've got a wonderful question from the floor, we do need to get a microphone to you to aid those listening in a different forum. There's a sign-up sheet Shakti's holding up at the back that's going to be on that table, that after leaving these proceedings, we can send you some resources and some links that Glenn's pointed us towards. So that's a good thing to do too, to add your email address. This event essentially is just put on by a bunch of second peoples that just basically said, it's on us. We need to do the learning stuff. This is not a First Peoples thing. They've asked a question. They have a desire, a need to have a voice in Parliament, but it's our job to be educated. As Second Peoples, as the one who've set up this system in the first place, it's on us to listen, to ask the questions, to find out as much as we can so that a vote, when it sits in our lap, we can stand at that place with as much information as is possible. And that's what this event is about. So we welcome your curiosity, we welcome your questions, we are really glad you're here to educate yourself, and may we carry that kind of spirit of Wominjeka to be open and inviting with our presence and our questions, and hopefully we can do that in a respectful way, that we all leave with a deeper sense of the journey we're all walking as a nation. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to this bloke, Glenn Loughrey, Reverend Doctor, who's the an Anglican minister, who's also a professor at ANU, who's got a few things to say, who's got some thoughts, some questions, some ideas. He's a bloody good bloke, and so I'm going to hand you over to Glenn Loughrey, proud Wurundjeri man, not to be mistaken as Wurundjeri, but we accept him nonetheless in these parts. He is well welcome here. And so, Glenn, we're really grateful for your time, for your passion, and we're going to hand over to you and leave you in very capable hands. Can we hear it for Glenn Loughrey?
Good afternoon, Dara Balinya Badu, Wiradjuri Yaman Nadi, Glenn Loughrey, Yarradu Marang. I'm proud to be Wiradjuri. My name is Glenn Loughrey, and Yarradu Marang means good day. Good day. So it's great to be here. I join my acknowledgement with that of Claire's and acknowledge the Wurundjeri Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and their creative, sustaining, sovereign relationship with this land, which has never been ceded, which has never been turned up, and that they have invited us to care for it in the same way as they did. This afternoon, we're going to explore the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The actual way I talk about it is the Statement from the Heart signed at Uluru, because it was put together by 1,300 people over 12 or 13 consultations over a 12-month period, and therefore it comes from the heart of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right across this country. It's not just the geographical point of Uluru. That's where it was signed, that's where it was crafted into the document we've got today, the statement, but it came from people on the ground, elders who are on the ground across Australia, who decided there were 4 things that they needed to see in any kind of approach to constitutional recognition. And those 4 things we'll talk about as we unpack the statement from the heart. I start at this point because if we start at voice, we get the kind of idea that it's a one-trick pony that's going to fix everything. We have to tie it into the whole philosophy of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander thinking, which gives us the statement from the heart. But one of the things I like to do before I do any of these events is remind us of the statement. And I read it so that you hear it. You hear it in this space, you hear it again, and you hear it at a moment when you're beginning to think seriously about your response to it, your response to what it asks. So we'll just take a second to settle, to do, as Claire said, some deep listening. We, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? The peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australians' nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement-making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better nation, for a better future. That's what we're talking about, that statement. And I want to point out a couple of things about this statement. Nowhere in this statement do you get the sense that it was written by angry people. Nowhere in this statement do you get the concept of a threat to other Australians. Nowhere in this paper, in this statement, do you get any sense of revenge, of taking back. It is what I call absurd compassion. The people most affected by the colonisation of Australia, whose populations, culture, spirituality, languages were decimated, stand up and invite those who did and were responsible for what had happened to come for a walk, to go for a walk together, and to develop a relationship that brings about change, constitutional and otherwise, in this country. It brings about a process that shifts who we are. It is a powerful statement. I call it, for those who come from the Christian tradition, the Sermon on the Mount written in the desert. It's absurd as what Jesus wrote in that statement. It's absurd as the things that Jesus said on the mountain. It's the same thing. And it invites us. And I don't know about you, but I like to be invited. I hate to be told. I hate to be dragged. I hate to be made go and do things. So when we're talking about this whole point of constitutional recognition, which is a 2.5 decades worth of work done by various governments of various stripes and shapes and by activists who have worked really hard to get us to where we are today. This didn't happen just because of the thing we call the Uluru, at Uluru, that process. It didn't happen because of that. It happened because of almost 30 years of hard work, as I said, by governments of all stripes and shapes, who brought this process forward and kept talking about recognition. Some of it recognition in the preamble, some of it substantive change, but it's been talked about by a number of governments. So we didn't get to this place like that. But here we are, and we talk about it because this is an important opportunity for Australia to put her big pants on, big boy pants on, big girl pants on, big something pants on, and face the world as a mature nation. This is what this is about. So the statement from the heart is an invitation, an act of absurd compassion and generosity from a people decimated by the very people that they ask, they invite to come with them on a walk. It is, if we take this process seriously, an act of transformational forgiveness. To act of transformational forgiveness. We know that we're not going to change Australia by having a civil war or a fight or an argument. We have to do it in terms of relationships, and relationships are what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people work on. Our relationship with land, our relationship with that which is on the land, our relationship with water, our relationship with each other. And we build those up over long periods of time. And it's how we overcome the issues that may be in front of us. We do it through a relationship that brings about transformational forgiveness for both people, both groups involved in the discussion. This is not just about us as Aboriginal people pointing to you as non-Aboriginal people and say, you blokes have got to pull your socks up. It's about how we work together in a transformational relationship. Because we have to make sure we're not being as colonial as you and saying there's only one way to fix that, that's the blackfellas way. Now, this has to come together and work. And that's the idea of the process that we find inside the statement from the heart. It's an act of transformational forgiveness, but on the bottom is the rider, if accepted. We can invite you to dinner at my house, and you have a yes or no option, don't you? You don't usually ask me for details about what we're going to eat, who's going to be there, but you do say yes or no. This invitation here, if accepted, relies upon you saying yes, not no. But we're not going to make you say yes. Okay? Because we've had a long history of being made to do things and we don't like it. So we're not going to make you do it. You have to make the decision for yourself. Statement of the heart. Well, the statement of the heart is about ceremony. It's about us getting together and talking in a yarning circle, in a process of engaging. It's about us learning to heal each other. It's that deep listening to what's happening in the space. Statement from the heart, written in the way it is itself a ceremony. I use it as a frame for my church services. I have liturgies built around this because it's a healing process. And it's a doing ceremony together. It's bringing us into a process of performative and transformative forgiveness. Not done from a distance, it's done together in relationship as a ceremony. That's the purpose of Christian worship anyway. It's a ceremony, performative, where we come together and perform the things that hold us together. It's medicine. Saving from the heart is medicine. I'll explain how we get to all this in a minute, but it's medicine. Because it heals us, because ceremony does that. We never start ceremony knowing where it's going to end. We might know what action we might have to do to stop it, but the ceremony on that process will take us into all kinds of interesting inner and outer spaces in ourselves and in our mob and in our community. Ceremony takes us into those places that we didn't know we were going to go to when we turned up. It's a process. Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people are people of process. We don't do it linearly. We don't go, well, this is where we're going to start, and that's when we get to there, that's the finish of this one. And we have this straight line that we follow it through. Again, it's about process. We don't have a timeline on that. It takes as long as it takes. And if it needs to take longer than that, it will. We don't have we have it as a process, not as a linear, hard format. It's a process that is soft and allows us through. It's a healing circle, and I'll unpack those 4 key circles within the circle in a minute. Everything's done in circle because circle's about wholeness. If we're inside a circle, we're held in wholeness. If we're outside the circle, we have to move ourselves into it to become whole and healed. Circles are healing processes. Interesting that you have this sitting here. It's a circle. Very important part of the process. Oh, and it's not a rush. My father used to say to me when I was a kid, and I would go and help him round up some sheep in a paddock, me and the old dog would go up the back. He would stay at the gate, chain smoking and rolling new cigarettes while he was stood waiting for the sheep to come down, because he had one in his mouth, one in his ear, and he was rolling another one all the time. And it went on the other ear, and then anyway, he would come back down and you'd bring the sheep down through the gate and he'd go, "Hey, you got somewhere to be, young fella?" And I go, "No, I don't have somewhere to be." He said, "Yeah, I think you do." "What do you mean?" "Yeah, you made dust. You made dust. Don't rush them. You'll miss something." And in this process, we have to learn it's about not making dust. That doesn't mean we don't go to a referendum in the end of the year, but we don't go to the referendum as if that is the dust that confirms we've made it. Okay? It's just pulling the mob together, and then we're going to move further down through the paddock towards the gate. There is this process. Don't think that once you get to the end of one thing, it's the end of everything. Don't make dust. It's important. It's not about destination anyway, because we don't know where the destination's going to look. People say to me, "What's it going to look like if we get to Makarat?" I don't know. We haven't even got through voice yet. And I'm not even sure what that's going to look like. But it'll look like what it needs to look like if we develop our relationships in such a way we are seeking the best for all. Here we are. Here's the big circle with the 4 circles on it. The statement of the heart, when it was written, and each of the groups that did it all had these 4 items with it, and all had them in that order, and they are meant to be seen as a circular motion. They're not boxes, tick boxes on a spreadsheet you tick off as you go down. Because a circle actually means you keep on going. Because as we beget voice, we'll understand need for more, and we move through this process, we'll understand need for more voice. And we'll understand need for more work on truty. We'll understand need more work on truth. It will be a process over a long period of time. The Canadian, Indian chiefs that were out here last week sort of said to me, it's 7 generational. We never start on a process thinking that we'll see the results of it. Okay? That we'll see the positive outcomes that we know are there. Takes, in their way of thinking, 7 generations. That's why we always work with people like you, younger people, because you're the ones that are going to carry it forward. You're the ones who, most of us, we're on the wrong side of a big number. You're not. We've got to pave the way for you. We've got to do the hard work, but it's up to you as the younger people who are going to have to make it stick. So all the responsibility is yours. Okay. You okay with that? Good. I'm sure you're up to it. In these things here, and the young people over here too, there are 2 young people here, it's in your ball court as well. You know that? Yeah, good. And that's not because you're in that funny place called politics, it's because you're a younger generation and you're going to have children, you're going to have family. It's what you need to do for us. And I threaten people who don't do it with I'll come back and haunt them. Sorry. So there's 4 things: voice, treaty, truth, and Makarrata. We often talk about Makarrata as encompassing the last 2. I split them out a little bit for a reason which you'll see in a minute. Now, voice is important. If you're not heard, you're not seen. And if you're not seen, you don't exist. You know about terra nullius? This is about persona nullius. Okay? Until 67, we didn't have a public persona as such. And now, even with many of the kind of processes that have been run through governments and other bodies over the years, we really don't have we're really not seen as persons in the physical and public sphere. Okay? We're seen as stereotypes. We're not seen as real people. So voice is important. It's about recognition. Putting our voice into the Constitution alongside the voice of the non-Indigenous population means that we're going to be heard. We're going to be real. A little boy went to a restaurant with his mother and father and all the rest of the family. They sat around the table. He was 5. And the waitress went around and said, "What would you like? What would you like?" And got to Dad, and he said, "Oh, I'll have the salad." And went to the mother, "I'll have the salad." And it gets to the 5-year-old, "What would you like?" And he says, "I'd like a hot dog." And mother said, "He'll have a salad." And the waitress looked at mother, looked at the 5-year-old, looked at the mother, looked at the 5-year-old and took a gamble and said, "What sauce would you like with your hot dog?" And when he went away, because the place was silent, Dad wasn't going to say a word. He didn't know what was going to happen next because this could erupt. And as it went away, and the little boy knew that too, and he looks around and he says, "You know, I think she thinks I'm real." Recognition. And that's what that's about. It's taking us out of and addressing persona nullius. It's shifting us back as real people. It's putting our sovereignty side by side with the constitutional sovereignty of the Crown. Not putting one on top of the other, putting them side by side, because the Crown sovereignty is a hard sovereignty. It's external. It sits over and atop everybody else. Our sovereignty is a soft sovereignty. It's about internal matters. It comes from within you for your connection to the ground. It comes from within your mob. And it's about relationships, as I've said. And both need the other in this particular sphere to bring about a whole. By putting our sovereignty alongside the sovereignty of the Commonwealth, we are healing our nation, making it whole, giving it the bit it's missing at this stage. Okay, so that's recognition. Then we go here to treaty. If I actually know you exist, and you're in my neighbourhood, I have to work out how to get along with you. We have to come agreement with how we actually live and share this space. And that's what treaty is about. It's sitting down and making that agreement about how we're going to share what we've got now that we know we both are here firmly, legally, constitutionally. If you take treaty first without locking away sovereignty, you run the risk of losing that sovereignty. Not necessarily going to happen, but by locking the voice into the Constitution and the sovereignty into the Constitution, you prevent the possibility of things falling apart. Okay? So treaty is that bit where we say, we're here and we're going to talk to each other. We're going to work this thing out. Doesn't mean we have to get to like each other. But I like most of you, so that's okay. I think. So we have treaty. So you have voice, recognition, then you have conciliation. And we've never done that in this country. We've never actually come together as one. The next one is truth. And truth-telling isn't about blackfellas like me taking my clothes off and showing the scars. I know it's a frightening thought. But it's not about us taking our clothes off and showing you the scars and talking about how hard it is and how horrible it is. Because people often say to me, we'd love to hear from you how it is like to be an Aboriginal. Oh, really? You know, that's a bit voyeuristic. You know, this is not about that level of truth-telling, although that level of truth-telling has to happen. But it's also about the truth-telling from the other side of the fence. I have a lady in my church and her family were the first people to own property in this area. Her husband's family were the first people to hold property in that area. And she's 85 and she says to me, every time I go back there, I wonder what happened to the people who were there first and what my relatives did. How did I get the privilege of being in this environment? How do I get the privilege of being a white person in the hills? You know, who had to give up their privilege so I could have that? So it's how do I feel about the relationships? How do I feel about where we are? How do I feel about what happens? That level of truth has to be told as well. I get heaps of non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people coming up and telling me those kinds of stories because they're desperately wanting to find ways to deal with their own trauma. Their own trauma. Some of the problems we have with this whole process comes out of that trauma because people are scared and fearful of what can happen to them. And it comes out of that trauma. I say to people, if you steal something from somebody, you're always fearful that they're going to come and take it back or somebody else will steal it off you. And that's part of this thing that we have to do in this truth-telling. And that's where we get reconciliation, because I get to go, oh, is that how you feel? It must be awful. And you get to respond in another way with me. And we share those supports. We find that we're not that far removed. We've all been damaged by this process. We've all been damaged by this process. Arguably, we've been damaged more. But that doesn't mean that we're not got a place to start that relationship. Does that make sense? Love it when I make sense. When we get to this point though, so we've seen you, we've decided to get along with each other, we've talked to each other about how this process works, and then we go to Makarrata. This is the process we would use, and particularly this is in our traditional justice processes. If we had had an argument and I'd done something to hurt you, we would come into the centre of the circle, elders would sit around and others behind them, and we would go through this process. You would have a voice about what happened, I'd have a voice about what happened. Then we'd find an agreement or a treaty to agree on what really did happen. Then we would tell each other how we actually feel about what happened, what it did to us, how we feel, and then we'd come to Makarrata. Makarrata isn't that wonderful sense of holding hands and skipping into the sunset because we all suddenly get along with each other. It's a bit harder than that. In our communities, that would be if I had been the guy that done the damage, you had been the victim, there would be a decision about what kind of reparation I would make. And often that was a spear in the thigh. And don't think spears in the thigh are superficial. You never walk the same again. And that's the point. You get to remember what you did and what the outcome was. You and others won't do that again. It changes, it's transformational, okay? And I hope you throw straight, because you've got to get me in the leg, not in the heart, okay? You've got to get there. The idea of that is that you walk differently. Again, for those amongst us from church backgrounds, go to Jacob at Peniel. He'd been a bit of a not really good 20 years ago to his brother. He's coming home. He's a bit scared of what his brother's going to do to him. He doesn't know. He's a wealthy man, but he's still scared. And he has this night on the river and he wrestles with someone, whether it was God, whether it was Esau, whether it was his own conscience. And then he makes up in the morning with a limp. And he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. He also gets a new name. That's what Makarrata does. When we get to that stage, and we've done all of this work, we will sit down together and decide how we move forward. What kind of reparations it's going to be. Everybody's scared when you use the word reparations that it means money. Not really. You can't afford to pay it anyway. Interest rates have to go up. But you can't afford to pay it. So it's not money. It's about how we do justice and place people in the right place and help them to become who they need to be by giving up some of our privilege and possibilities that we've got. There's a process. And we don't know what that's going to look like, because if we've done the others together, we've developed this relationship that allows us to get to this place and go, this is not as hard as we thought. This could look like this, or it could look like that. The danger of jumping from voice to Makarrata is that we miss out on the process and we presume what the outcome's going to be. I know it's hard for Western minds to go to, it'll be what it'll be. Yeah, be what it'll be. It is what it is and it are what it are. And it's hard for you to do that because you want to know what the outcome's going to be. I've got to know in my big brain, my little brain up here. You see, you've got two brains. Did you know that? You've got two brains. You've got your little brain up here. That's the stuff that does the logic stuff. That's the stuff that gets you into trouble. Then you've got your big brain, which is this one here. And I've got a very big brain. It's your gut for Aboriginal people, that's where your emotions and feelings and your connections to real things happen. That's what keeps you alive. Your gut reaction. What are you feeling in here? We have to let go of this little brain and move forward. What is the referendum? It's the culmination of the work towards constitutional recognition, saying that the first peoples, the people who were here BCP, before Cook and Phillip. Okay, BCP, not the Book of Common Prayer, it's before Cook and Phillip. It's about putting us and recognising us in the birth certificate of the nation and saying there was another sibling we forgot about, put them back in there. We've got to be in the Constitution. It is about then setting in motion the process to do the elements of the statement from the heart over time. It doesn't just stop with our recognition in the Constitution. We say that when we do constitutional recognition, one of the performative ways that that process will be carried out is for people to have a voice to Parliament, to all elements of the Parliament too. Not just the Parliament, but to the executive. Because if they're doing legislation and they take it to Parliament and we say, well, that's not really good, you've got to go back, why don't you go back and have another look at that? And the Parliament says, yeah, I think they've got a point, you should go back and have a look at that. Wouldn't it be better to do that first? Might save a buck. And then it's built, as I said, it's built on decades of work for recognition, and it's not about the voice alone. It's not about the voice alone. Unfortunately, that has been politicised, and that has been seen as being something that we can divide our nation over, some people having a voice and others not. It was interesting, I was with a group of people in my church this morning, some Chinese people, and one of the ladies, who's a real good supporter of us, said, but, isn't there a risk that, the Chinese will want... And the Chinese gentleman said, no, we don't want a voice. We're immigrants. We came here and we're advantaged by what happened. We don't want a voice. First peoples have to have a voice. And that's my general response from immigrants on this matter. These are the three sentences that Mr Albanese suggested as Gama. We haven't got the final ones yet, but these are things that we'll be looking at. You've read them before, read them again. And already in there is the statement about the executive government. You see, what we're doing, putting in the Constitution, is that we're adding another heads of power. If you go to the Constitution and you have a look at the tax heads of power that was put in 1901, you'll find that it has no real legislation sitting under it, because the legislation in tax has changed umpteen times since 1901. And if we'd have put all the detail of the legislation into the Constitution, we'd have had to be changing the Constitution every time we changed laws. And that's not possible, practical or sensible. And whatever is around tax in there is nothing like how tax is operating today. So it's heads of power. It says to the government, to the Parliament, you have the right now to legislate around these matters. And yes, sometimes they end up in the High Court. Do it over tax law all the time. There are a lot of people who are QCs and others who make a lot of money out of taking legislation to the High Court. That's the normal process. It's how you test legislation. Doesn't mean that you want to pull it apart, but you're testing it. What is its limits? Where does it go? How does it fit? It's not frightening. It happens all the time, and mostly you don't even know about it. This stuff goes on all the time. So that's what it... and the Parliament, made up of all the different interest groups, political parties, whatever you... What's the way? A lot of people in Parliament all get a chance to have a say on that and to vote on that and to engage in the debate about that, which I think is healthy. We do it in our mob. We sit in a circle for weeks while we work out something. Everybody gets a say. I think it's healthy. The draft question would ask, do you support an alteration to the Constitution that establishes an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? This is what Mr Albanese said at Garma. It hasn't been finalised, we haven't got the final sentence, but it'll look something like that. It's that yes and no question. Okay? Do you or do you not? It's important. The interesting thing about our research shows that people of our age group are more likely to vote no. I'll ask you why later. The 18 to 34s are all going to vote yes. 35s to 45s, yeah, we can persuade them to think about this and be positive about it. But it's not a hard question. And it's not something we need a huge amount of detail about. The voice is what the First Peoples asked for after all those consultations. They said, we want this. We want to have a say. I have an exhibition in my gallery at the moment which is based around what happened to the Darling and the Menindee Lakes in 2019 when it went completely dry. And it was a community inquiry, and all these Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people all talk about the reason why the river went dry. And basically it keeps coming back to, we didn't have a seat at the table. Those people who run cotton farms and etc., they have a seat at the table, we don't. I went there when there was no water in the river. I went there when the water was 9 metres. But there was still no water because the water there then was full of poisons, blue-green algae. You couldn't go in it. You couldn't drink it. So our people are saying, give us a voice at the table so we can talk about this. That's what the voice is about. It's permanent and it's advisory. Remember that word. Advisory. We can't veto anything. We can just advise. But I would say, if 65 to 70% of Australia voted yes, my advice to whoever's in power at the time would be, take notice to the voice, because you might get a kick in the bum at the next election, because 70% of Australia said this is what we want. So there is some democratic power inside the process. Consists of First Peoples representatives. How are we going to organise that? We'll work it out when we get there. I'm a part of an organisation called the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Anglican Council, of which I am the chair. We've been going for 31 years. We have representatives from every diocese in Australia, possibly 63 people. We come together, we talk a lot, and we put motions to our General Synod, which is our Parliament. Sometimes they listen to us, sometimes they don't. And if they don't, we find another way to sneak it in. We keep on going. But we are the voice in this sense, and we consist of 4 people. And let me tell you, in that 63, only about 4 think the same. Isn't it funny when people say, all you Aboriginals can't, why would we vote for this? Because you don't all agree on it. And I go, who did you vote for the last election? Who did you... Well, see, you two can't even agree. It's okay for us not to agree too, And we shouldn't, we shouldn't be disparaging about Aboriginal people who don't think the way I think. You know, they're entitled to that. It provides advice impacting First Peoples, laws and policies. And that's to do with the stuff to do with incarceration, health, all of that matters. Okay? Fairly simple. Can't block the legislation, it can't deliver services, and it can't handle money. Okay? Pretty simple. Why do we need constitutional change? So when the next mob gets in, they can't get rid of it. And that's not pointed at any particular mob. It's just that if it goes in now, or if it got in under the last government, we don't want it being changed. We want it locked away, because as our experience of the last 31 years is its peaks and troughs. Okay? It goes like that. Sometimes you have people you can work with and it really takes off. Sometimes that isn't the case. And that's okay. And that's the case of the Constitution. We make that clear because of APSIC and other bodies that disappeared. Now, maybe they weren't the right models, maybe they were inappropriate, maybe they weren't the right kind of accountabilities, I don't know. But, you know, they've disappeared. Sometimes for political reasons, sometimes not. It's not vulnerable to political changes and can focus on more effective long-term solutions. Remember the seven generational law. So the people in the voice aren't there, shouldn't be there, to capitalise on activist moments. They're there to plan for the grandchildren of the grandchildren of the grandchildren. Okay? It's an important step in acknowledging and addressing the wrongs and ongoing harms of colonisation. Racism continues. The way we treat children are taken away now at greater rates than they have been before. You know, 100% of the teenagers in Northern Territory jails are Aboriginal. And it all comes out of the impact of colonisation. Walter Mingolo says from Duke University that dispossession has a psychological and both a psychological and a physical impact. If you have everything taken away from you, the only thing you have left is your body. And that becomes yours, and the bodies of the people like you becomes ground zero for protest. So it's why you drink. It's why you do self-harm. It's why you harm others, because that's all you've got left. One of the reasons, one of the ways of helping to take that away over this 7-generational process is by giving people a voice and giving them back what's been taken away. It doesn't have to be land. It's just the right to have a say. Empower our people to speak on matters relating to them. It's hard to talk back to the white fella. It's taken me a long time to get to this stage where I can stand in front of you and do this without having my fragility meter on, which says how much truth can I tell these blokes before they stick me in the mission. We carry that. Aboriginal people carry that. They may not be aware of it, but I listen to them talk. And I know what they really think when it's just the three of us around a fire. But I know how they react in this environment. So it's empowering our people to speak on matters which relate to them. And that's important. One of the things Mingolo talks about in terms of decoloniality is delinking from the colonial and re-existing what was there before. And when he says that, he's not meaning going back to living like that. It's beginning to re-exist the knowledges. And we've seen over time with the fires, learning how to do slow burning. We've learnt how to look at planning, and there's some great work being done between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people of putting into planning the kind of thinking that is Aboriginal thinking, philosophy. And there are some, a professor by the name of Arabella does a lot of work on Indigenous knowledge systems through things like physics and mechanics and how the two work together. It's learning to live in two worlds. And not just us. You have to learn to live in two worlds. Okay? Don't preference what you think you know. Coloniality is driven by universality. It built around the idea of the universality of one faith, Christianity, which went on across the world. It built about the universality of one race. Whiteness was across the whole world and took power. And it was built around the universality of one economic system, capitalism. And that's what sat at the basis of colonialism. So we need to get away from that. We have to learn to live in two worlds. Do we need more detail? I've mentioned that. This is heads of powers. We don't need detail. How's it going to work? Same as every other heads of details worked. We give it to the government of the day and legislation, and they fix it up from there. That's their job. That's what we pay them for. We do pay you, don't we? Good. And I've done the Australian tax law. Will it cede sovereignty? No. No. I stand before you as a Wiradjuri person, as a sovereign Wiradjuri person embedded at birth. I carry country in my body. I can't give that up. I can't cede that. And by the way, sovereignty doesn't belong to us. It's in our relationship with country. So it's a spiritual thing. It's like if somebody persecutes you, they can hurt you physically, but your faith remains. In this situation, we can't cede sovereignty. As I said, what we'll do in this process is put it beside the sovereignty of the Commonwealth. Both will function, maybe a little better, maybe a little differently, maybe living in both worlds. And it recognises, as I said, the external versus the internal, law versus law. Hard law written down with words that you interpret, and law that comes out of the ground, that's in your body, that is internal and interprets you. Different kind of concepts. Will it divide by race? Too late for that. Australia has been divided by race. That's, again, one of the key things of colonialism, is race. If we elevate one world view, white, Western European, mostly males, world view, and we destitute Jewish, Moorish, African worldviews, as happened in the 1600s, when the Spanish applied the skills of horse breeding to human people. In other words, they said pure breeds, 100%. You have to be pure. If you're Moorish or you're Jewish, you're not. It's only white Spanish people. That became a practice that went right across. That's what happened in Africa, where we went and we undeveloped those countries. At that time, there was more libraries in Africa than there were in Europe. They had their own set of practices and governance, but we undeveloped them on the basis of race. And we took the people who would be the best leaders for those countries going forward and made them slaves. And they died on the way to the newly minted Americas. And the same process came back here to us. because we were built on race and slavery, because that's where the money came from. So to talk about dividing Australia on race, it's too late. That's happened. What we now have to do is that conciliation that we were talking about. We have to fix up that persona nullius that we were talking about. And we have to undo the concept of white possession. One of the dangers with this whole vote is that political parties of all stripes will have their opinions, and they will possess the debate through their opinions. They will possess the story and claim it, whether it goes up or it goes down, for themselves. Because we tend to like to possess things and people, etc. Why not treaty first? I said before, it runs a risk of ceding sovereignty. There is some thought that possibly it might be more appropriate for states to do treaties. I don't necessarily agree with that, because most of the experiences occurred in the states and all states were different. What happened in the north is different to what happened in the south. What happened in New South Wales is different to what happened in Queensland and Victoria. I come from a place where 100% of local Aboriginals, because I wasn't local Aboriginals were exterminated, to use the words of the guy that did it, William Cox, by 1875. Every single one of them. When you walk around on the ground, your feet are sticky. So the difference means that maybe there are room for state treaties such as we're doing now. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't the process 1,300 people agreed upon. And if we're going to honour Aboriginal people and their voices, we need to honour this process the way they saw it. The way they saw it. It's called honouring your elders. It is honouring consensus. It's honouring a democratic process. What about immigrants? Well, First Peoples are that, not immigrants. Lots of people have struggled with that. I had a certain Archbishop from England who, when we had this discussion, said, well, it's similar to our immigrant problem in England. And the auntie that was sitting next to me said, whoops, Archbishop, we're the First Peoples. We're not immigrants. We might have been 66 and 990 years, 9 years ago, but we're not immigrants now. Immigrants who come here now are recognised as equals. They become white because they take on the system and the thinking and the practices that are the places they're in. We don't have the White Australia policy anymore. It's always scary to the students that come to me and I say to them, you know, I couldn't have had you here in the 1960s. And they go, well, I said, we wouldn't have people like you here, you'd take our jobs. And they don't know about the White Australia policy, so you then unpack that for them to show that how Australia is very different to what it was when I grew up. Because I'm nearly 70. I grew up in the assimilation period as an Aboriginal person. I grew up in the middle of the towards the end of the White Australia policy. And we didn't benefit from the end of that policy, okay? Changed nothing for us. And immigrants benefit from the dispossession of the First People. That's why they can buy houses, have jobs, run businesses, borrow money. My father tried to borrow money after the 67 referendum and was told, we don't lend money to people like you, blackfella. Do all First Peoples support the vote? No, polling says 80% do, but I don't know about that. And it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. We shouldn't have to all agree so that you feel comfortable to agree as well. This is a spiritual, emotional and ethical and moral decision, and you have to find it in your gut about how you support. Many of our people have had different experiences of governments. Often, we're not really that fussy on them because they took away half of our family. So we're always going to have trouble with governments. But we shouldn't be making this about governments. And we shouldn't be making it political. It's not political. It's about justice. Putting right the original sin of our nation. We have had too much saying sorry and no significant changes have occurred. I can run up a heap of very important politicians who just never followed through. Just didn't do it. There are a lot of voices there, okay? And each one of those voices, I will tell you, has a right to have a voice. That's the point of this thing, okay? And we shouldn't disparage any one of those processes. Jacinta comes from a particular point of view, out of a particular place that she sees. Whether you agree with that or not, it's not important. What we do is have to listen and see how we resolve the things that she raises. Lydia does the same thing. Lydia is still looking for that moment when we can have a full Aboriginal sovereignty for ourselves and make our own decisions. I would, if I had the chance to talk to her, say I think we're on that road right now. But I understand where she's coming from, and that's okay. And you have to listen to these voices, not so much to have an argument, but to learn. Somebody said to me once, keep your friends close, and your enemies even closer. Somebody else said, it's my enemies that teach me the most. I don't see them as my enemies, but they're people who have a different point of view, and they teach me a lot. And I gather all that information because I want to know why they think like that. I have more concern about the National Party and blood content. That was raised by a National Party politician the other day. There are 3 rules for being recognised as an Aboriginal in this country, and none of them have anything to do with blood. And I always say to people who say to me, what part of you is Aboriginal? That opens up all kinds of answers. Depending on the place, I'm going to. But I say to you, what do you want to know? I say, well, are you, 25th, 112th, 168th? I say, have you had your DNA done through Ancestry.com? How much of that was Australian? 0. Because there's no DNA marker for Australia. So you all identify as Australians because you were born here. You're not genetically Australian. So why is it an issue to ask us about that question? Why do you need to know how much Aboriginal? The old saying is that it doesn't matter how much milk you put in, it's still coffee. But it's a big issue, and that helps to split us up. And that puts into the mind of even some Aboriginal people who say, well, you're going to get a benefit from this. Well, I'm not going to get much of a benefit from any of this. I'm an independent, fairly, in a sense, I don't own a house or anything, but I'm fairly privileged. Okay? I'm okay. What I'm worried about is the kids and the families that aren't and have no possibility to be. In the end, that's where the ones that I'm working for. Oh, yeah, what did I say here? Go back. Where'd that go? Oh, golly! I want the second last one. There. Oh, I love the mountains. There we are. Our friends the Liberals in detail. We don't need detail. The detail is there in all the documentation. But what we're really doing is voting, as I said before, on a moral and ethical and a spiritual basis. We'll leave the governments, the Parliament, the people in Canberra with the responsibility to fix the detail. As I said, that's their job. But I can tell you that if this nation votes against this, I'll be looking for a country somewhere in the world to go to live. because it'll be really uncomfortable as an Aboriginal to walk down the street. Okay, so it's a big issue. Mob, there's lots of different views about it from different Aboriginal people, and some of it comes out of fear, as I mentioned before. You can scan that code. On that website, it's my website, there is a whole range of resources that you can use, download. There are frequently asked questions, there are videos that I've done, there are papers that I did for the Australian National University. There's theological reflections for those people who want theological reflections. And that will be, I'm being released by the diocese to do nothing but the voice for the next 6 months. So in that process, so I'll have to get an appointment with you. And Jim. And these papers, this will grow and develop with more and more papers going into it each week, and it'll be there for you to have a look at and to see what it's all about. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay. We warmed up now? Excellent. Yeah, let's hear it for Glenn. Very grateful for a primer, just an entry into such a dense conversation. I'm so grateful for the way you what's the word I'm looking for? The way you pull together such density in an understandable way. I'm sure some of your questions that you came with, some of them will have been answered through that process. I'm sure for others, it's brought up more questions, which is great, because it means we're learning and trying to discern the gut, that big brain, the moderate brain, the less big brain. But what I'd like you to do now, to change the energy, turn to the person next to you, try and just voice your questions. Don't share opinions, ideas, thoughts. What I want you to do is just try and work out what are the questions floating to the surface for you. Just so that when we go to open mic, which we're about to do in just a moment, that the clearest, most concise version of those have been crystallised for you. So, park the analysis head, the thinking, the ideas. What are the questions that you really want to have grappled with and answered by Glenn now? So let's do that. Just person next to you, couple of minutes, change the energy, stretch the shoulders, turn the neck, and then in just a couple of minutes, we'll hear those questions.
Is that all right?
That was great. Russ. It's just one of those combos that just brings up so much stuff. And I love the way you pull out. It just kicks so many. Rather than us because if they're not well answered, you just gather other snippets you've heard and use that to charge your hands. People are able to get a lot of that.
I'll put that PowerPoint into the
We were going to do read the questions that might be coming from Zoom Lab, but there's only 2 on Zoom, so I'll just relay them if there are any.
I'm going to take my cup out.
Okay, friends, final minute, just voicing those questions to each other, preparing them, and you may even work out between you whether someone's willing to ask the question. Can I invite Glenn back out the front? It's about this point that, knowing it's an event that has some size to it in terms of 2 till 4, if you do need to leave, if you do need to make your way out as question time continues, feel free to do that. Don't feel bound by this space. If you need to get up and grab some water, there's some water on the counter just out there. Feel free to do that. Don't feel too bound to your seat. But what we'll do now is hear some questions. So if you can turn your chairs back, rejoin the space. What we'll get you to do is be aware that we won't be able to get to everyone's question. Also be aware, as I said earlier, any voice spoken here needs to go into a microphone just so those at home can hear them. And just note too that I'll try and get a spread, a diversity of voices from age and gender, and so if you feel that I'm skipping past you, it's only to try and get, it won't be a first in, best dressed kind of idea. I might just try and get a spread of voices, so that will be why we dance across the room. So wait until I get to you with the mic, and then we'll hear from you. So, who would like to... That's a really good call. There's some practical reasons. Does anyone not want to be filmed? If that's the case, the camera's here. One of the best places you can sit, if you're concerned about it, is in the back corner here, just as the camera swings around and gets the voice. There's a whole lot of reasons why people may not want their face seen, so that's totally fine. But just so you're aware, there is a recording, and I reckon back in that back pew is a really good spot that the camera can't swing around to. Cool. We're going to go to our open question time. Who would like to launch us? Jackson, go.
So my question's about, you mentioned a little bit on things like activism and allyship and like kind of the structural issues that are in place with like capitalism and like how they contribute to colonialism and the ongoing issues of today. So it's kind of like how, like as an ally or an activist moving forward, do we best like help support the statement from the heart and towards treaty and constitutional recognition and all those sorts of processes?
Thank you. We'll have our second question at 4:05. That's a very good question. The first process is that, I would say to you, vote yes. You may not be old enough, but are you old enough? I am old enough, yeah. Good. You look young, that's all. Anybody under 50 looks young. First of all, I would say vote yes. Be across the discussion and the story and the kind of things that I've given you this afternoon, and allow yourself to engage with others who may have a different view. Don't argue. It's not an argument. But inquire as to how people think, why they think the way they do, and then respond out of what you know as this is how I see it, not in a direct argumentative stage. So I think in the first place, one of the best points at the moment as an activist, and if you want to get, that first rush of success, support the voice and talk about that. In terms of allies, remember some basic things like, whose voice is it? It's not yours, it's not the Uniting Churches, it's not the Anglican Churches, it's not the Labor parties, and it's not the Liberal parties, it's not the Greens. It's Aboriginal voices. So allow that voice to have its say, listen to it, reflect upon it, and allow it to educate you. And another thing is, who are you speaking on behalf of? Okay, when you say that you're speaking in this discussion, are you speaking on behalf of yourself wanting to have a say in this discussion? Or are you speaking in such a way that allows the other to have their voice heard? Okay, there are a lot of people who speak in this discussion and in the activism that goes forward that, despite all their well-meaning intentions, are actually speaking only on behalf of themselves. And they're mediating the process, and once again our voices get lost in that thing. So it's that self-awareness of why you're about to say what you're about to say. So it's that, you know, television has, what is it, the 2-second button or whatever it is? 7-second dump. Yeah, that's it, thank you. You have to work on that 7-second dump in your own mind. You know, similar, good question, but nah, it's really all about me. I need to push that aside. How will I talk about this in relation to the other? So it's shifting the focus out of, you know, what is inherent in us as Western-style people. You know, we have opinions, you know. We have opinions and we want other people to hear our opinion. Well, opinions are like haircuts. Everybody's got one, but they don't all look great. We shouldn't see some of them. The same thing with opinions, okay? So you just got to think through, and when you get into activism, join groups like the one that's here and others, listen to what elders are saying, every opportunity you get to talk to elders and hear them, and don't just go to elders that speak the same stuff that you want to hear. Listen to some of the elders who will speak different stuff, because you need to get that variety and colour and breadth so you can be effective in giving us a voice. One of the things I say to people is, I don't care who gets the credit as long as we get the job done. So if I'm working with you and you're in a place where I can help you make things happen, that's great. I'll help you. It's not about me. As I say, you know, there's no I in mob. Okay? So there are the kind of things I would talk to you about and suggest that you do. Read, and not just, again, things that are easy to read. And I can give you a list of books that will hurt your head, but you need to read them because they will give you insights and teach you how to think outside. A fellow by the name of Howhouse was an American theological teacher at a university, and he used to say that first-year students used to come in thinking they had their minds made up. And he would say to them, you don't have a mind to make up until I teach you. And his point is, don't hang on to what you think you've got. Don't peak at school. You've got a long way to go. And you will find knowledge comes to you, activism comes to you. I'm 70 and I'm only just hitting the straps. Seriously, I am. So it's a long way. Don't burn out in the first week.
Next question. Great.
Glenn, I'd just like to pick you up on a detail.
Oh yes, probably a lot of that.
Not pick you up, no, just expand on a detail. The 3 tests, whatever, of Aboriginality, I only know of one, identification.
Yeah, self-identification, genealogy, and being accepted by a community. So your community has to accept you as an Aboriginal person. You have to be able to show a certain amount of genealogy, which is a real stumbling block for many of us who come out of either the stolen generation or out of, as in my case, a non-identifying family, because the genealogy stops very quickly. My great-great-grandfather, as far as we can understand, was probably Jimmy Governor, chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. He wasn't a, you know, he massacred a number of people and went on the lam, and it's the reason why we had the opening of the Federation in 1901, because it was supposed to be in 900, but they couldn't catch him. And it went on for 3 or 4 months. Brought troops back from overseas. So it's hard for us to go through genealogy and go back. Okay, if he is my great-grandfather, then I have another line, but we can't prove that because it was an illicit relationship. So that makes it also. So yeah, they're the 3 things. I only really need that if I want to do an Aboriginal identified job. For lots of people it does hang on it, yeah, and there's a lot of reasons why people don't identify. It's just too hard. And then once we've made Aboriginal peoples, nation states, becomes even harder because people then want to, manage who's in and who's out. And I don't have the energy to go through that. Okay, so I don't apply for, I would never apply for, an Aboriginal only job. A, I'm too old, but B, it would be too traumatic for me to go through that process. And as there are nobody in the local land council where I come from who knows any of our history, no one knows that my father tried to shoot Brett Whiteley. That's another story for another day, isn't it? You'll come back and ask me, how did that happen? Okay, does that help?
Other questions? I might go there and then I'll come back here.
Just a quick clarification. Is it a 3 out of 3 with those stages, or 2 or 1 acceptable?
Oh, no, generally they would want you to cover up all 3.
Okay, thanks.
Okay? But as I said before, I find it difficult because you guys can get a pension as Australians and you're not even Australians. So how does that work? Could save the government a lot of money, couldn't it? Hey, that's right. We're on to something here.
Go down well.
Oh dear.
What would be the consequences of a no vote?
Oh. The consequences of the no vote is that we'll be back at least 1, maybe 2 generations before this question gets asked again. I would think. Just this is my thoughts on it. You know? I think we would be forced back several generations before we get a chance to ask this question again, and therefore the kind of colonial paternalism will continue to occur. The other big issue is what I was talking about before. For Aboriginal people, a lot hangs on it for us. If we find, even if we don't necessarily agree with the question, but if that question is answered in the negative, it says to us very clearly, we still don't belong. We're still persona nullius. We still don't exist. Even if we vote no, or we say no, and it gets up, we have an opportunity to continue to say, we want treaty or we want that. But if it goes under, the appetite of the Australian people to deal with this going forward is gone. So I suspect one of the real risks is that, as I said before, when all you have left is your body, the kind of negative behaviours and dysfunctional behaviours run the risk of expanding. Okay, and that's this whole question is a huge risk for Aboriginal people, and one of the difficulties I have with all of this is when it gets into the political sphere. Please don't pay politics with something as serious and dangerous as this. Yes, you don't have to agree to it, but don't pay politics over it. Because at the end of the day, this is going to cost us deeply. And I look at, so many of the people that I know live in very fractured places. This is just going to fracture it more.
Can I ask one more? Just one more question. Not playing politics, do you think that that would mean the parties all giving their members a free vote and being able to cross the floor if necessary?
Oh dear. My response would be that I would rather that the political parties all said yes, this is our policy and we're going to support it. We have some concerns in this area and this area, and we'll deal with those when the legislation comes up. but, you know, let's get our country together. So that would be my first preference. And I would like to hope that that happens at some times moving forward. Other than that, I do think that every politician on this matter should have the right to follow their conscience and follow what is part of their own approach to life. And I think that would be the most powerful thing a political leader could do. The most powerful person is the one that gives away the power, because suddenly people trust them. Trust them to allow others to make the right decision for them. And I think that's a very powerful point, that if I ever had the chance to talk to a political leader, which I probably won't, I would be saying, here's a chance to be a part of one of the greatest changes this country can be, and you can go down as the person who made it happen. There is no glory in being the person to make it not happen, because there will be consequences that will be uncomfortable for everybody involved. Okay, is that reasonable?
Other questions?
Hello. I've got a question. Hopefully I can frame it right. Okay. Culture going forward, it has to be nurtured to go on into the future now. You've got lots of examples where people say, this is not going right. For instance, destruction of rock art, for instance. It's like, oh yes, you can park a bottle shop outside a community in Alice Springs. Things that surely make the job of teaching, learning and spreading culture to the future more difficult. How does the Voice proposal help to bring culture forward?
I think in the kind of examples you just used, one of the things that the Voice would be able to do in this larger picture is sort of set some parameters and suggest some suggest some parameters to Parliament about where certain businesses, etc., should be, for example, about how to give self-determination in those communities to Aboriginal people to say what they will or will not have in the space and how that will work. I think this allows, one of the things that a Voice will do, and it will encourage culture, because for the first time culture will be in the Constitution. So it becomes important as part of sovereignty, as part of Voice. And therefore we will begin as people to have the courage to do culture for ourselves in our own places, because it has some value now. It struggles now. We talk about doing culture and how that is protective. It is protective, but its protectiveness loses its power when you move outside of those particular communities into the bigger, wider world. So if we've got to get across the line, the Voice will allow communities to actively engage in culture and cultural education, cultural protocols. You know, we might think about why we bring kids down from the bush to private schools at certain age groups when they should be at home doing certain levels of cultural training before they get down here. Why are we not, in terms of education, why are we not focusing on Aboriginal pedagogy, which is an open-ended, you will learn when you're ready to learn, and this is the process, and this is how it happens, and you do it in relationships. Why do we throw that kind of pedagogy away for the linear Western education, which doesn't suit our kids at all, because none of their life's been in that kind of mode? So I think it's got huge possibilities to do it, but again, it's a 7-generational process. Don't think we're going to see results of this in the closing the gap numbers in the next 1, 2, 3 or 4 years. It's going to take longer, because we've had 250 years of not being there. So you can't just go, hey, fixed, Move on. What's the next problem? Climate change. Oh, no. Okay, did that answer your question?
Other questions? We might go here.
If a referendum were successful, what would then be the risks? What could go wrong after a yes vote?
Oh, well, the politics continues to be played in the parliament in the sense that the people are not open to collaborating on an appropriate outcome in terms of legislation and processes. That's a risk. The risk is that governments ideologically will say, well, while we're in power, we're not going to listen to this lot. And that's always a risk. But again, it's why we talk about the 7-generational process. Don't get upset if this person or this party, for the 3 years or 4 years they're in Parliament, aren't cooperative. They won't be there forever. Let's play the long game. Let's move to a strategic process that leads forward. And this is what we have to be in this process. It's not activism, it's strategic visioning. Strategic visioning, seeing what is possible and how to go about making it happen. Sorry, people at home. Go about making it happen. So that's strategic process, you know. Don't worry about the war. Win the little battles. Get the skirmishes under control. Don't worry about getting all of this in one fell swoop, you know. Marriages are made by living together a long time because people work through the process. So we do have to think about this in the same context. The risk is that we'll want to make dust, okay? And we will want to get it quickly. You know, the leaders, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders who are sitting in on The Voice will have to avoid the noise coming from their own people, which says you haven't done this, you didn't do that, you haven't fixed this, you haven't made that happen. And you'll have to resist the voices coming from the political, corporate and other sphere that says you're meddling, and just stay on the long game. And that's the most important. If we get it into the Constitution, they can't get rid of it. So then we line up for a long game and work and get to know politicians, talk to them, you know, get to relate to them, have conversations, get to know them, possibly get to like them. I'm sure, look, I know quite a lot of politicians and I've liked most of them.
Okay. Good ratio. Other questions? I'll go here and then I'll come to you next.
To my mind, the messaging about The Voice to date has been rather confused and negative in the media. I'm wondering how the message can be changed to present a more compassionate and clear message about The Voice.
Yeah, I think you've got a good point there, but media in Australia has not been known in the last 25 or 30 years as being terribly positive about anything. Okay? Yeah, I think for Mr. Murdoch. But we have this media that is driven by separation and difference, and the media that goes for the more controversial of people's statements, etc. I often get phone calls from media to say, will you comment on this being said by so-and-so? And I go, no. I don't comment on people who are spreading misinformation, because in doing so, I'm giving them gas. So if you want to ask me about it, I'll tell you what I know and what I think, but I will not respond to people who are deliberately spreading misinformation. I will not give them the ear. I don't get a lot of interviews. But it's important that we put those barriers in place and we say, no, there's an integrity here that needs to be kept, and I need to keep mine, and I have to help you find yours. Do you understand why I'm not speaking about that particular person's point of view? But it's and the other thing is that we tend to like, again, often male, but older academic kind of people who have been revered over the years but are not necessarily very supportive to the process. There are a number of them go around that go to events like this and say they're talking on behalf of the yes vote, but by the time you get to the end of the conversation, you're going, well, I probably won't vote yes now, because there's been so much negativity in the conversation because it comes out of... So we have to stay away from that. Be careful of who you listen to. Be careful of who you invite to talk. Just because they've got a reputation doesn't mean they're going to give you the right information. Good information. So I don't know how you resolve that. I think, as I said, my action is to say, no, I won't do controversial responses. I'll do good information, but that's it. I think also the other part, and our young friends here will tell us that they don't watch Channel 9 news, thank goodness. They don't read the Herald Sun or the Australian or the Age. They get their information through TikTok. Is that right? Twitter? Me thinks you protest too much. But you get it through those social media kind of avenues. And so there's going to be a lot of work done on that level to get that information out there. You'll be surprised how many people don't know what this is about. And I talk to school teachers, talk to headmasters, I talk to doctors, and these people are so busy doing their thing that this whole stuff has gone past them. And you have to go back and help them to understand. Does that answer your question? Probably not.
And would you be up for doing some work on TikTok, Glenn? Can we see...
You want to do something, do you?
I want to see you on TikTok.
I need someone to advise me.
Jackson can do that. He'll be responsible for your TikTok account. Hang on, just clarify.
My partner actually suggested you should go and address the press club in Canberra.
Oh, well, I'd love to, but it's probably not going to happen. But I'd love to have the opportunity to talk in those kind of places, because I think there's a balance that is missing in this, that we always go for, we go for Mr Dutton because we know he's going to say a certain thing. We go to Mr Albanese because we know he's going to say a certain thing. We know these people, but what we need somebody to stand between those two and say, there's room here for all of us. Let's come into this house together. I'd love the opportunity, but I doubt that it's going to happen. Maybe if you do.
Our friends across the Tasman and New Zealand have a history of First Nations and more recent arrivals.
Yeah.
Likewise Canada, likewise the United States. Do any of those other countries have a model of the voice? That's the first question. The second one is, in New Zealand, I understand, from presumably way back, considerably the last 100 years, there are assigned seats for Maori people in the parliament. Do you see any place for that in Australia?
All of those countries you said, most of them have what are called treaties and not this kind of model. Because if you go to, say, Canada, I think it was somewhere 1613, 1631, they got their first treaty with a tribe in Canada. The Canadian Indians would say, well, it still doesn't work, even if it's been around that long. We still have to negotiate, work through, learn, go back, come back, go back, and they're still doing that now in the 2023. America is much the same. There is no voice in Parliament. If you were to go down to South America to places like Bolivia, actually their constitution has been rewritten to include Indigenous people. So there really isn't, and I guess we've got the opportunity here to learn from the mistakes that have happened in other places and the errors of running into treaties without properly being informed and knowing what they all were going to be. You know, people say to me, what about detail? And I say, if Captain Cook had given us the detail about what was going to happen, he wouldn't have got to Tahiti. He mightn't have made it anywhere else. But so I think that we have to be careful about treaties, and even the people in New Zealand will say, yeah, we have a treaty, but both of us break it regularly. You know, so I mean, we don't need to, there is nothing like this anywhere else. And I think we have the opportunity to put it into this space without politicising it by putting Aboriginal people into designated seats. I'm not in favour of that. I don't think that's appropriate. And I also don't think it's appropriate to appeal to the fact that we have X number of Aboriginal people as parliamentarians. They're in there as Labor politicians, Liberal politicians, National Party politicians. They're there for their electorates, and they should be. They shouldn't be just about us. That's not their job. They were elected for a very different purpose, and they should be there. So I don't want people in there who are gifted in that place. I want something that is representative of our people. And the processes put in place to put a voice in will mean that we have opportunities at times to change the people in that seat place, shift people out who aren't doing their job, because we can vote them out. We can look at how that thing works. And I think that's a far more effective process in the long term. What happens when we have a treaty? That will be different. But it might be a treaty that is very different to the other treaties in the world, because it'll be based on the fact that we already do have a voice. Okay.
Great questions, folks.
I've actually got two questions. One comes out of a conversation I had with someone the other day who had seen an interview with a resident from Alice Springs, and someone who, the Alice Springs resident, was very disenfranchised and expressed an opinion that no one asked us about this voice thing and that they didn't really know what it was. I responded as I felt at the time, but I was wondering if you could suggest what sort of response there might be, which goes back to the division and the different opinions rather than division within the community. And the second one was about, I just heard on the news the other day about a woman, an English woman whose family had acquired great wealth out of slavery. And she had made she was making a gift back to the Caribbean island where her family had benefited. And I suppose personally also, having understood my family, my ancestors had a part in dispossession in Australia, and having had the good fortune to meet an elder from that country and speaking with her and being on the receiving end of that extraordinary generosity and humility, I guess my question is about how we encourage people to actually, you know, if they're in that reflective place, to reflect on that and how we might explore that as part of the whole process.
Yep. I mean, your first question is a question that we often get asked, and people often say we weren't asked to be what our opinion on this was. More people would have been asked if the government at the time had gone with the 39 consultations instead of the 13, but that was money driven. And not everybody, we have to be realistic, not everybody is going to get a chance to be in those kind of processes. I didn't get a chance to have a voice in it. But my answer back to people is we don't always get an opportunity to have our say, but we need to honour those people who did by recognising that they did have a say. We may have a different opinion, and that is okay, but we have to recognise that these people came up with this we don't all get a chance to be a part of it. We don't all get asked, you know, about superannuation law. Okay? We'd drive the Treasurer nuts for the next 20 years if he did. But, you know, we leave that to our representatives. So, yes, not everybody got to have a go. But there was lots of consultation. The papers were out for people to respond to. It's difficult for our people to do that, and it depends on the effectiveness of their representative bodies at the local level, land councils and others, and how much they're able to work together without any kind of internecine war. Okay? Which, I mean, it happens in every, I mean, look, every school council, every council body, they all have arguments with each other. It's not the end of the world. But I think my answer is that, you know, not everybody gets an answer, but we are to honour those that did have a say and support that, and in the process find ways to bring other ideas in. I think the idea of doing reparations, I rarely talk about it because people grab their house keys and sit on them because they think I want to come and take their house. I said to one bloke one day, I said, "Nah, mate, I don't like your house, it's got 2 floors. I've got to go up and down stairs. But I like your neighbour's house, it's flat." I was joking. But I think there is opportunity. I think that's one of the things we do about the Makarrata and the truth-telling in Makarrata, is that people begin to tell the truth and then find ways for them and the people that were harmed to do to perform repentance, to perform a return. And it might be that you just simply, when you die, you give 25% of the house sales to Aboriginal people. It might be when you sell a house. It might be whatever you come to that agreement inside yourself. And it shouldn't be legislated. It's got to be genuine. It's got to come out of a relationship. It's got to come out of having time with the people and understanding the overall. I had a bishop once say to me, "We discovered down the side of this church that this used to be an Aboriginal burial space." So I got the deeds for that particular land and went down to the Aboriginal people and said, "Here it is, it's yours." And they said, "We don't want it." And he was all indignant about the fact that they didn't want it. And I said, "Do you know what they're doing? I don't want you to do the easy thing. I don't want you to grab the deed, come down and give it to them and go away. They want you to sit down and talk about the hurt, the trauma, the story. They want you to do the hard work of engaging with their pain. They want you to be a part of that for a period. Do ceremony together. Do things together. Have meals together. Get to know and build that relationship. Yeah, they'll take it back eventually, but when they're ready. Not when you want to appease your conscience and do a little thing in the newspaper to say, "We just gave this land back, aren't we? Great." It's got to be that process. And I think everybody, and you know, people like yourself, it is how you think about it. Trust the ancestors. They'll tell you eventually. They'll whisper in your ear. God will give you a kick in the butt. It will come in the time when it's right. But we have to open up the possibilities for that. Up where I come from, there was a guy that gave back several hundred acres of his property to the local people. So they could use that for the people that are there now. They could use that for things that they wanted to use it for. So there are people who do it. And there are organisations who buy up land and give it back. Australians for Conservation, I think, is one of those. Yeah, they get land, they regenerate it in relationship with Aboriginal people, and then they will often gift that back to the Aboriginal people who will continue to look after it. So I think there are options and there are precedents that allows that to happen. But we shouldn't legislate reparation.
We might have time for perhaps one more question. Is there another question in the room? Joy.
When you said how you would leave Australia because, I know you probably won't, but it made me think about the previous referendum we've had and how much hatred went on through there, and my shame at the Australian Christian lobby actually putting so many millions of dollars into a no vote. I'm wondering who are the people who are trying to screw this whole thing up? Who should we be targeting? No good talking to somebody. I can't imagine anybody saying no. Who should we target?
Yeah, look, I'm like you. How can you say no to a reasonable ask? But people will. And people will for political reasons. People will for out of fear. People will because they really don't know why they don't say yes. They really don't know what it's about. There are a number of organisations, and if you watch if you're on Facebook, you'll watch your social media feeds, you'll see things coming through from unnamed organisations which are really quite dangerous in the things that they say. We know that they're going to be the genuine no campaigns of the people like Jacinta and Warren Mundine, and we need to listen to their questions and need to listen to those, and we need to take those seriously. There's a level of the right, far right, that we saw during COVID, which will be arguing a no with lots and lots of venom, and people like me who are out in the public will be on the end of a lot of that. So we need to be careful, and that's what I'd be saying to all the people that sit and work in Canberra. Just be careful how you speak, because it will. You won't cop it, I will. And people like me will, and people like me who have less capacity to deal with it will. The normal Aboriginal person. So just be careful how you use your rhetoric. It's important. I'm not saying don't say anything at all. Just be careful and know that there are people who are going to use that in the most devastating of ways. Okay? Probably didn't answer your question.
I was sort of hoping you'd give me this corporation, that corporation.
No, I wouldn't do that, because there's a thing called, there's a certain set of laws that might get me caught up if I did that, so I can't say that. And I wouldn't say that anyway, because once again what you're doing is you're putting those people in the spotlight, and they don't need to be in the spotlight. You just need to be aware of what good information looks like. You know, if they're doing colorism, it's not good information. If they're talking about how much money has been spent on welfare for Aboriginal people, it's not good information. If they're talking about the division by race in the country, it's not good information. So you look at those sort of things and follow your big brain. What is my gut telling me when I read this? This is sensible or it's not. And then go back to the sources, and some of those are on that website, in a sheet on that website, if you go there and have a look, and I'll add more as they come up, and as I'll put them out. So, I think one of the things that the Statement from the Heart does, in its absurdity, is that it appeals to the goodness of Australian people. And it says, you say you're good people, here's an opportunity to show it. But it appeals to that. It doesn't condemn, doesn't put anyone down, doesn't yell about the past, just says, here's an invitation. Come and join us out of the goodness of your heart. And I think that's the power of it. I think that's the wonderful thing about it. It's the most powerful restorative justice process in the same ilk for Christians that the incarnation was. Okay? And both were absurd. God didn't have to do it.
It's distilled First Nations wisdom in that document, for sure. We need to wrap up. To do so, I want to commend the Hills Walking Together Facebook group, where we post lots of diverse articles and papers that Shakti and her crew manage to do, and use Glenn and other resources to advise that. So a great little spot to see. Hills Walking Together, that's the Facebook group. Glenn's given some wonderful resources there. There's one other event I'd love to commend to you, and that's Survival Day next Sunday from 12 p.m, just around the corner here in Belgrave. So it's previously been on previously been on the 26th of January. It's a terrible slipper. And of course, that crew identified the cost of running that event on that day, under the banner I just mentioned, was too costly, and so the date got moved, or the event got moved to next week, which is here on the screen. There it is. So it's a really well-attended event, a wonderful educational event, and a great one for us to continue our education, support and allyship. Yes?
I don't do Survival Day. I don't survive. I live. I'm here. I remain who I am. I don't survive. That may be uncomfortable for people, but I'm not destituted by the idea of just surviving. I remain, and I'm going to be in your face.
Thrival Day.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm grateful for all of you being here today, for what that says about your desire to learn, to understand, to grow, to continue your education journey. I'm grateful for you, Aaron, being here. I think it's a fantastic thing as the voice of this area and this electorate to be here and hear community sentiments. So I'm really grateful for giving up your afternoon to be here and listen. And really grateful for you, Glenn, for helping us continue the conversation. And I also really appreciate the reminder for me that there's a fragility to this. It's not just a box that gets ticked when that happens. The cost to you and other First Nations peoples as this conversation is swirling around us. So thank you for the reminder. It's not just this intellectual exercise, but there's lives, communities and culture that are wrapped up in this. So may we take that with us as we all enter into relationships, conversations, and indeed a vote at the end of it. So Glenn, can we have a last round of applause for Glenn and his time? Do you want to say anything else?
No, I know I've said enough.